I'm Mike the Brother, and this is TerraQuip Talk. After years of providing drilling equipment solutions, I know that a project success hinges on reliable, high-quality rigs that meet your needs. So if you're ready to make smarter equipment decisions and build stronger foundations, let's get started. Hi everyone, how's it going? This is Mike the Brother from TerraQuip Talk. I hope everyone is well in the light of all the events that are happening now in the world. It's a very interesting time. But we're not here to talk about that. When I started this podcast 7 months ago, I wanted to give a voice to the industry. I wanted to share the knowledge. I wanted to talk about equipment because that's my passion, right? And of course, it's also my passion to talk about equipment and our industry with people that have an interesting story to share, people that have a lot of experience. And my next guest is exactly the right fit. Now, my next guest has worked in more than 21 countries, close to 40 years experience, and the last 15 years at one of the largest companies in our industry in the world. His name is Mark Peter Newton. Mark, welcome.
Thank you, Mike. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
That's my pleasure as well, Mark. Now, Mark is joining, for those of you that don't know, this is not really a usual setup that we have here to film our podcast, but we have Mark online in Spain, in Barcelona, right?
No, I'm in Malaga, actually, Mike.
Oh, Malaga. Okay, there you go. So what's happening is here in Australia, we're shooting at like 7 o'clock in the morning. Mark is joining us at 10 o'clock at night there in Spain. It's a bit of a different episode, as I said, different setup that we have here in the studio, but I know it's going to be an interesting conversation because we have someone of his caliber. So, Mark, how are you?
I'm very well, Mike. Thank you. I'm very well. As you mentioned, I'm just embarking really on my retirement after, as you said, almost 40 years. I'm kind of getting used to it. I'm not missing anything yet. I'm still enjoying this. So whether I'll start to get itchy fingers in a couple of months or so remains to be seen. That's what everybody who knows me seems to think will happen, but we will see.
You know, as soon as I saw your LinkedIn post that you're hanging your hard hat and your high vis after so many years. Now, I don't know if you remember, but I've actually met you a few times. We had a few discussions, and I think the last time that I've met you, I don't know if you remember, it was at Sydney Airport. You're just sitting there on a bench having a cigarette right near the airport. And I was like, hey, Mark, how's it going? It's Mike from TerraQuip. And you're like, oh, yeah, good. How are you? I was like, do you want to share a cigarette? Do you remember that?
Now you mention it, Mike, I do. I hadn't. But I mean, catching me having a cigarette outside Sydney Airport was a very common occurrence at the time, yes.
Yeah, so look, thank you so much for accepting to talk to us. Now, I've got a set of questions here because I don't want to miss anything. You know, there's just so many things that I want to ask you, and I hope we have time to go through everything. Now, let's start with the beginning. How a lad from Leeds that wanted to become first, you wanted to work in the military or be an architect, right? How does it become to work in piling?
Yeah, kind of by accident. So probably from the age of about 13, 14, the school that I attended, secondary school I attended, was a very, very old-fashioned all-boys grammar school. Old-fashioned in that the teachers still wore the Malta boards and the black capes. It was a really old-fashioned school, but it was a military cadet school as well. So they ran a military cadet program there with the intention of trying to entice young guys like me into the military. So at the age of probably 13 or 14, I joined the Army cadets within the school, and it was a little bit like the TA, a little bit like the reserves. We would go off on weekends and camps and all this kind of thing. And for many, many years before that, I had always had mechanical inclinations. My dad, who was originally a coal miner, but did his trade as a mechanic and a auto electrician with the old National Coal Board, as it was in the UK. he used to race motocross bikes, or scramblers, as they were known in his day. And so from a very young age, I'd been on bikes. And part of the fascination of the bikes was actually taking them apart and putting them back together again. So with this military kind of aspect within school, which I really, really enjoyed, my original career ambitions were to join the REME, the Royal Electrical Mechanical Engineers. And I was fortunate enough when I was about 15 to go on a camp to Larnaca in Cyprus, to the military air base there, and do some work on helicopters. And it really kind of got me interested in that's really what I wanted to do. And I thought the military would give me a good way of doing it. It kind of came to a stop. It came to a stop probably when I did a 6-week camp at Catterick Army Base in North Yorkshire. Okay, I've never been one really for compliance to rules, and I don't respond well to large authority, and I kind of underestimated how much of that there would be in the military. And whilst I enjoyed the mechanical side of it very much, I really did not enjoy the
discipline side of things.
Absolutely, the discipline's not the problem for me. I'm a grafter, but being shouted at and told what to do constantly was just, it really, really, really got up my nose. And also at that time, bearing in mind this was like late 70s, early 80s, was the time when they had the Northern Ireland troubles in the UK. And it was made clear to me that had I gone into the military at the age of 16 rather than staying on and attempted to go to officer college, one of my first postings would have been Northern Ireland. I ended up there some years later, but at that time, that really kind of my parents also were not keen on that at all. So the military career kind of hung in the balance for a while, and to try and distract me, my father was a good friend with an architect who worked for a bank, and he asked me if I'd like to do a bit of like after school work and during school holidays and see if I fancied architecture. And it's not something I'd really thought about at the time, but I enjoyed it. It looked like a good career. In fact, I still to this day can remember with my eyes closed how to fold A0 paper drawings the proper architectural way. How bizarre is that? Okay. So having kind of put the military thing aside, the intention was to try and do my A-levels and get a position at university and study architecture, which is a long course actually. It's the same as medical. It's a 7-year course, or was at that time in the UK. Unfortunately, at the age of kind of 16, I discovered alcohol, women, and punk rock, and that kind of put paid to my studies, and I ended up really not getting the grades I needed to take up my university posts, which desperately disappointed my parents. And again, through a contact of my dad's, I ended up on a educational internship as a civil engineer with the local authority, with the local council, which was Leeds City Council at the time. I was in their highway design department, and that's where I continued my studies for the next 2-3 years. And I was posted on a project on the Leeds Inner Ring Road where a company called Secant Piles were doing some precast piling, and I was kind of involved with what they were doing, and they offered me a job, and the rest is kind of history. That would have been early 1987.
1987 is pretty much when I was born, 1984.
Okay, yeah, pretty much. Yeah, so
it's really interesting. I tell some people that I talk to because I'm the representative of IMT drilling rigs here in Australia and New Zealand for the last 8 years, and sometimes, with a tongue in cheek goes like, oh, such and such company, sold so many rigs, such and such company. How many rigs did you sell? And I was like, geez, I don't know. Let's see. That company started in 1984 when I was born. I started in 2008. I think they did sell more than me. Yeah, it's safe to say.
Yeah, absolutely.
But anyway, so throughout you have such a significant career. Throughout your career, you have some really, I guess, significant episodes, and one of them is the one in Dubai. You happen to be in Dubai between that boost when that boom was happening between 2005 and 2008. When, I mean, you guys were taking companies, they were like $40-50 million a year. And within the span of 2-3 years, you're taking them to $500 million a year. How does a growth like that look from the inside, Mark?
When I think back on it, and we tell these stories amongst ourselves, particularly the guys who are still alive and who were there with me when I built the team, we talk about this all the time, especially in the pub. The stories, I could sit here and tell you stories of that period of time, probably from now until next week, Mike. It was something I think that would never be experienced again. And it's probably only the second time in my career, and the first time was when I started with Balkan Piling, and they put me on my first site, and I actually wondered what the hell I had done, that I'd made a big mistake here. This wasn't for me. I was in the wrong industry. And the same thing happened to me, or similar, when I got to Dubai. Now, bearing in mind, this was in 2005, so I'd been around a while already, and I'd just come from 10
You had a
years.
significant experience already, yeah.
Absolutely, and I'd just come from 10 years in Southeast Asia, working on some massive projects all over Southeast Asia, in Hong Kong and Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, all over the place. And I kind of made the move. I was getting a little bit stale in my position with that company in Malaysia, and I was kind of getting a little bit fed up of constantly being away from home. My kids were born in the late 90s, and I was never home. I was always traveling. So this opportunity came up to go.
Oh, I know the story, Mark.
Yeah,
I'm exactly the same.
It's very common in our industry, unfortunately, and that's another story you could tell in the pub for a long time. But
for sure.
yeah, I was offered the opportunity to go to Dubai in 2005. Now, bearing in mind I'd had a fair bit of Middle Eastern experience already, which I think to my employer at that time also kind of made me a little bit more attractive. It was very common for people to move out to the Middle East and just cannot hack the environment, the temperatures, the way things are done there, and turnover of people is very high. So if you've demonstrated previously that you've successfully worked there, then you're a fairly good option. Yeah, so I was offered the opportunity through various connections to go and take on this role in Dubai in 2005. Now, I had not realised really what was going on in terms of the boom. It was probably about, within its first year, it really kind of kicked off 2004. And so it was on the uprise massively when I arrived there in 2005. But I really did think, bearing in mind this wasn't a big international company, it was a local company based in Dubai, Lebanese owned actually. They had 3 old Italian machines, Trevisol machines. Now, I thought I knew most of the piling rigs all over the world, but I'd never come across Trevisol before. And when I saw these things with the tilting cabs, it looked like, Fred Flintstone should have been operating them. I thought they were older than me, these things, and I was, oh my goodness, what on earth have I done here, coming here? And the brief that the owner gave to me when I arrived, and I'll never forget sitting in his office, and he said to me, Mark, he said, the reason you're here, I want to be the #1 piling company in the United Arab Emirates. Okay? Everybody is springboarding off this boom. There's more work than we can handle. I want you to build me a company and a team that is number one by quality, by safety, and by volume. Okay, no pressure then.
Wow.
You know? So now
simple request.
bearing in mind at that time already the likes of Bauer and Bashi and Swiss Boring and Trevi and all the big players are already there, you know. Balfour Beatty Ground Engineering, the old Stent from the UK, everybody's there. So, I mean, this is a significant ask. The one thing that the owner was very well connected, and you know, the work was just, well, it got to a point in probably mid 2006 where we just stopped tendering. You know, we were getting jobs on the basis of, can you have a rig on site next week? Okay. And then you put your invoice in for whatever you think is.
That is just unfathomable, right? Like, it's just unbelievable.
You cannot imagine, Mike. You really cannot imagine. But, you know, when I first arrived there, I spent the first few weeks just observing what I was seeing from what these guys were doing. And I was the only non-Arabic, non-Indian, non-Pakistani, the only white face effectively in the entire organisation. So that came with its own kind of suspicions from the guys on the ground. But I couldn't believe what I was seeing. You know, I'd like to think I was taught the right way how to do this job, and what I saw was far, far, far away from the right way.
Just briefly on it, are you talking mostly in the sense of safety, or in the procedural, or the lack of, or in what sense it was not what?
Yeah, not so much safety. The safety things came later. I mean, I'd been around Southeast Asia for the previous 10 years, so, you know, you cannot compare, certainly at that time, the safety standards that existed, with the exception perhaps of Singapore. Singapore was slightly different to everywhere else. But, you know, if you look at Australia, for example, when I came there later, you can't compare it was basic. But you would have guys, you know, doing tremie concrete or fixing steel in flip-flops, okay? There was no such thing as safety boots or hard hats. So an entire culture had to be changed. But to be fair, the authorities in the UAE at that time reacted. They lagged a little bit, but they reacted actually quite well to the boom in terms of attempting to force all builders, developers and contractors of all trades to step up their gaming, particularly in terms of safety, because, you know, fatality-wise was just it was just unnecessary and ridiculously high, you know. But yeah, I did question after probably the first 5 or 6 weeks that I was there, Mike, whether I'd really bitten off more than I could chew. I'd never ever doubted my own capabilities, but those early days there, I really thought, my goodness, if I don't get a team around me very quickly to help me with this, then I just can't manage it. It was just too much, you know. The owner was pushing me. Money wasn't the object. Whatever you want, you can have. And, you know, I started with the workshop, and I said to him, look, we are an equipment-based industry, okay? If we don't get our workshops right, when I walked into the repair workshop for the first time and they are they're stripping apart hydraulic motors in the sand, then, you know, I said, look, this is where we need to start. If we don't get this right, and then we base everything else off our workshop, we build our fleet, we build our people, we move forward, then it's never going to work. Unfortunately, he backed me, and I spent a lot of money and a lot of time and effort in building what at that time was probably the state-of-the-art workshop in Dubai. There was nothing else like it. We really went to town. I was very fortunate to get a hold of a couple of ex-colleagues of mine that I'd worked with over the years who agreed to come, specialist mechanical people, yeah. And they built me a set of workshops in there that really I could springboard everything else from. But yeah, in terms of how quickly the thing grew, you know, when I arrived there in early 2005, we had these 3 old Trevi Sol machines and a couple of really, really old IHI Sumitomo crawler cranes. By middle of 2008, we had 63 rigs, 4 diaphragm wall cutters, and over 100 cranes. We went from an employee base of 150 people in total when I arrived to over 4,500 in 3 years. It was just
unbelievable,
absolutely insane. Absolutely insane.
How does someone manage their work-life balance when they're in such a position and you have that feeling of like, oh my God, I bit more than I could chew?
There really was no such thing as work-life balance, you know. These were 15, 16-hour days, 7 days a week for almost 5 years.
Do you feel like a position like that has had a significant, let's say, not a significant, but like an impact on your health life?
No, not really. Not that. Well, possibly. Maybe I've aged a little bit more than I should have done in appearances. I don't know. I've always been blessed with pretty good health. Fortunately, I've never had any issues with my health, and it's in my nature. I think as I say, I come from a line of coal miners, and it just, work,
very strong
work ethic. Very much so. My dad and my granddad were very, very strong on work ethic and work integrity, and I think that just rubbed off on me. And you do what you have to do if you want to succeed. Otherwise, you pack it up. It's not the industry, or it wasn't the industry for somebody who wants a work-life balance. It doesn't work. Even in Australia, it doesn't work.
Throughout someone's career, even in our industry, I always look at my situation, at least. There's moments when you need to push really, really hard. And there's those like 6-7 days a week, 16 hours a day days, yes. And then there's the ones where there's times where like, okay, now let's say I have a baby, right? I need to focus a little bit more this period, on my family. It's really impossible to go 100% all the time. At least I can't see that for myself,
Yes, you're right, but again, it comes down to individuals. When my first son was born in 1997, he was born at 7 o'clock in the morning on a Monday morning, and I was back on site by noon that day. So it was
different world, eh?
Yeah, my wife never lets me forget it, but that was the norm. That's how it was.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, let's move a little bit later. So from 2005, 2008, then we have the bust in 2000. What comes up must come down, as they said. In 2008, 2009, we had the global financial crisis, and especially in Dubai, everything came to a halt. Now, how can a company protect itself when that tap turns off and all of a sudden it's like there's no workaround? You go, there's a drop of like 80%, 70% in some cases. What can a company do to protect itself against times like that?
Look, in normal situation, had that not been Dubai, if I'd been anywhere else in the world with any other company, providing for something like that is always about foresight and provisions, okay? And having a strategy in place. Our industry is notoriously cyclic. It goes from huge peaks to very deep troughs, and it always has, and it probably always will. But what happened in Dubai was something completely different off the back of the GFC. When everything started to kind of come out that something was going on, which was probably second quarter of 2008, if I remember. At that time, everybody thought Dubai was bulletproof, that there was so much money there that, okay, it might just slow down a little bit, but we're just gonna continue as normal. Everybody thought that. And for us, there was a very specific trigger as to when everything almost came to a stop, and it was basically New Year's Eve of 2008, 2009. And we had just been awarded the largest single job that we had ever been awarded. In fact, I bought 2 brand new Bauer Diaphragm Wall cutters off the back of it. Very, very big D-wall and piling job in an area called Wanzabil in Dubai. And the eventual owner, through a string of holding companies, was Sheikh Mohammed himself, the ruler of Dubai. So this was kind of the telltale that whilst he was still going forward, then Dubai was still going forward. We started the project in the August of 2008, and I remember sitting in the owner's office on New Year's Eve that year, 2008 going into 2009, and we received the notice of contract termination for that job. And it was like dominoes on a unprecedented scale. Within 4 weeks, by the end of January, early February of 2009, there wasn't a single project in Dubai that was running. Everything came to a complete halt. And I sat many times with the owner and said, look, this is not something we can control. We just need to rein things in. We need to cut our costs. We need to try as best we can to not let too many of our key people go. Let's not panic. We have funds in the bank. Of course, money outstanding in 2009 was a massive issue because, in that part of the world, payment is more by honour than by contract. It's not the done thing amongst the Arabic community to be known to be owing somebody money. But because it happened so quickly, we had in the order of about $360 million US in the market, certified unpaid at that time. But we also, in theory, we had a healthy bank balance. So we discussed many times and said, look, we've just got to consolidate. Let's not panic. Everybody's in the same boat here. What the unfortunate thing is, and it was not just the construction industry, it was basically the whole of Dubai, and why it crashed so badly is that all that money that was supposed to be there in the banks was actually not there, Mike. It was in Lebanon, it was in Russia, it was in Pakistan, it was in Iran, it was everywhere but where it was supposed to be. So in paper, we could have survived for a year doing nothing. But in reality, there was no cash. Couldn't pay the electric bill, couldn't put fuel in your car. So it just became totally untenable within a very, very short period of time. So a little bit unique, off the back of a unique situation of the GFC. The reason Dubai crashed so hard was because of that, because the money that everybody thought was there was never there.
This is actually really interesting, Mark. Is this a sign that usually happens? Because I've seen throughout my career and in my business as well, a time where, hey, on paper, we look fantastic. We've never been better. But in reality, we're not that great.
Yeah.
And you look at a lot of the contractors out there, they're talking to me about like 2-3 machines, and yet they can't pay a 10% deposit. They're like, we're still waiting for funds.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how are you talking about all these numbers, but you don't even have 10% of that liquid cash ready to transfer it in order to, to achieve a certain delivery?
Yes.
And I'm just looking at it like we've got our fingers in so many pies, right? And theoretically we're doing fantastic, but on paper, right? Is this a sign that's something like that is coming, or what do you think?
It's very difficult to say. I mean, again, I think it was a very set of unique circumstances there in that part of the world at the time. You've got to bear in mind that unlike today, where it's changed completely, financial restrictions in that part of the world in terms of money laundering and tax and things, it was very, very loose. To move money around in and out of the Gulf in 20 years ago was very, very easy. Stories of people, running around with suitcases full of cash, and 747s arriving from Cairo and unloading containers full of cash. It was very easy to manipulate the reality of where everybody stood, and because there was so much money and so much work, really nobody ever paid really any kind of attention to it, because cash flow up until that point was so good, nobody really cared.
Yeah, no, fair enough. It's just an interesting situation because In Australia, I'm not sure how aware you are, but the last sort of few months, it's been a bit of a boom. Everybody's is asking for rigs. There's just so many projects that I think they've been delayed from last year, because last year the first 9 months were absolutely scary, right? The worst I've ever seen in the last 15 years in the industry. And then all of a sudden, October, November, December, and continuing this year, the best months I've ever seen in the industry, right? And it's just such a huge up and down, such a huge roller coaster, which is, again, specific for our industry, but I'm not sure that at this scale, at this level.
Yeah.
That's why I asked this. Hey, before we continue with our episode, I just want to say, if you're someone that shares our passion for drilling, you have experience and you want to tell your story right here at TerraQuip Talk, we would be more than happy to have you, even if you're someone from a company that doesn't use our equipment. Now back to the episode. Speaking a little bit about going back to the international experience that you've had in several countries, you've worked in Yemen, in Indonesia, in Singapore, and then, of course, you moved to Australia as well. Can you talk a little bit about the adaptability, let's say, from one culture to, in a country like, say, for example, Indonesia, to a country like Australia?
Okay, from a personal level, the only way, and I remember the very early stories of the foreman who taught me my trade when I was at Balkan Piling and Hercules Piling. He's not with us anymore, bless him. But he'd worked in the Middle East extensively in the 70s and early 80s, and I remember him always saying to me that if you want to travel with this job, and generally if you want to, the opportunities are there. Adaptability is absolutely the key. You have to be able to read the room in terms of your environment, and you have to adapt to them. Do not, if you go somewhere and expect that the country and the culture is going to adapt to you because you're an Englishman and you've arrived, and then it's not going to happen. And a lot of people make that mistake. People that I've known over the years that have really failed. So, from a personal point of view, adaptability and awareness of the different cultures and the different ways that things are done, not just from a work point of view, but from everything, it's extremely important. And the success that I've enjoyed, fortunately, I think has come mainly from the fact that I have been very adaptable to just about every culture that I've come across, from Central America to Russia to Southeast Asia, and even to the Australians. And depending on who's listening, your audience, I found the Australians actually the most frustrating people to adapt to in my entire career. Perhaps we shouldn't go down that avenue if you've got a predominantly Australian audience.
We do, but hey, we gotta be genuine here, right? Like that's what makes a good conversation, No, of course, with a bit of a tongue in cheek. I've had some international experience as well. Nothing to the same level as you, but still, I think it's really interesting in Australia, especially when it comes to the safety culture, when it comes to procedures on site. I mean, you've got such a huge broad of companies, from the moms and pops, owner operator, piling rig business, to the mid tiers, companies that have like 4 or 5 rigs, and then to the heavy hitters such as Avo Piling, Keller, you name it, and the culture differs so much, from the level, right? And also on the state. I mean, I always say, look, in Australia, you can find any sort of job site you want. You can find a sort of job site that you'll still find in India and Philippines, with flip-flops and tank tops. Yeah. But you can also find, the highest possible tier 1 level of, safety, culture, procedure, equipment, you name it. And that's why I love Australia. It's such a huge range of everything, right? From people to equipment to procedures. I don't think you can really see anywhere else in the world. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's very true. And, Australia, particularly from a safety point of view, from my experience of it, the safety culture within the construction industry in Australia is predominantly driven by those experienced in the mining industry. Okay. So my first experiences of Australia were 4 years in the Pilbara doing FIFO and working for the likes of BHP and Rio Tinto and such like, And that culture is extremely strict from a safety point of view, okay? Necessarily so, absolutely necessarily so, when you think about the environment that you are in and the nature of the work that you are doing. And I think what the eastern seaboard of Australia has benefited from, and we tried to do this from as when I was there with what was Frankie Pyle and then with Keller later, we realised that the differences in standards, and I'm talking about safety here more so than quality or anything else, the differences were astronomical between what the procedures and the safety consciousness that you had to have working in the likes of the Pilbara under the mining companies, to doing a basement project or a small commercial piling job or even a semi-large for a big tier 1 contractor. Massive differences in the attitude towards safety, and we made it a mission, having spent all that time constantly on these big jobs in northwestern Australia, to try and take that back with us. We had 300 or 400 guys on the big job, which was Wheatstone, which was the last one that I did in the Pilbara. And we had a lot of guys there from all of the old Keller companies on site, and we took them all back predominantly to the East Coast, to Melbourne and to Sydney and to Brisbane, and try and carry that, what we'd experienced and what we'd learned and what the benefits of it were, to take that back to the day-to-day work that we were doing on the East Coast, so CFA piling, boat piling, even later on into the Diaphragm Walls.
Diaphragm Wall, yeah.
But it was a tough gig, and the one thing that really kind of got my goat, which I really didn't enjoy, is effectively an entire, maybe parasitic is a little bit too strong, but an entire industry attached itself to construction off the back of these requirements, which is wholly not necessary. Yeah, it became attached, and people made careers and money, a lot of money, out of attaching systems to our industry, the construction industry in general, not just piling, with all these safety cultures, particularly those who had come as safety managers, safety officers, safety advisors, whatever you want to call them, from the mining sites, and particularly the remote ones. It's a very difficult balance to ensure, the keyword safe productivity. If you split those two words apart, they tend to clash against each other normally. It's not an easy concept to grasp, because one has to give way to another to a certain extent. Okay?
Absolutely.
And this is one of the tough things that I struggled to really get my head around in Australia, was the extremes that this is taken to the point where it almost becomes prohibitive. And I don't think that's healthy. What you need to do is change the culture of your staff. You need to educate them properly. You need to make them accountable and responsible for their own actions and looking after themselves and their fellow colleagues on site. This is the only way to adequately and safely manage safety on any kind of construction site, is to instill it in the people. Throwing 300-page procedures at them and doing 20 toolboxes a day, it doesn't work. It doesn't work anywhere in the world.
Yeah, certainly interesting, Mark. That's, as you said, maybe that's also a discussion for another day. But I generally agree with you.
It's a big topic.
It's a big topic, yeah, that we need to dedicate an entire episode to it. Now, you mentioned a little bit earlier about diaphragm wall, and this is something that I'm very passionate about as well when it comes to different drilling technologies. I mean, you can build a wall, with a secant pile. You can build it with a diaphragm wall. You can build it with CSM. Can you talk a little bit about the diaphragm wall and its benefits? Because one of the purpose of this podcast is to actually talk about technologies and give the knowledge, to people that are maybe not that experienced in that, but would like to find out?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, diaphragm wall, I was introduced my first diaphragm wall in the centre of Kuala Lumpur in 1996. The first time I'd ever seen anything on that scale. It was a huge job right in the city centre. And I took it over as coincidentally, the 9th project manager by the contractor. Again, that's a whole different story. But I'd never seen anything like it. This was a 7-level basement excavation right in the city centre of Kuala Lumpur, and they were doing it with. It was predominantly diaphragm wall with ground anchors. There were some secant works there as well. But I think because of my love of machinery, and bearing in mind that I'd spent the previous kind of 3 years in Qatar, in Doha, where we were drilling piles with old Soil McCarthy 3 crane mounts based on, Ajax air-driven cranes that were older than my grandfather. To see this kind of equipment was just like, wow, this is fantastic. It was like in the schoolboy in the toy shop kind of thing. And I was very, very fortunate to be introduced on that site to a very, very experienced German construction superintendent who kind of took me under his wing and showed me and taught me basically what was going on. And I got a passion for it initially just because of the size of the machines. It was like this is proper piling and very much different kind of application for drilling fluids for bentonites as well, which I had used significantly, but not onto these kind of volumes and this kind of scales where, I've got a slurry plant on a site like that that's 3,000-4,000 cubic meters, and the whole thing is constantly reprocessing 24/7. So that's kind of where I got the interest of it, should I say, more on the equipment base. And as I moved on, I did quite a lot of diaphragm walls in Malaysia, in Hong Kong, and in Singapore. I've just got a real taste for it because it's the heavy end of our industry. It doesn't get much heavier than a big D wall, But you also learn, bearing in mind that by this stage I'm kind of not that heavily involved in the tendering. And looking at alternatives, So it's almost scales of economy when it comes to D-walls, particularly when you're talking about cutters. There comes a point where you're looking at a retaining wall of a certain size and depth where any other system is either ineffective or just becomes too expensive. As we all know, a secant pile wall has its limits in terms of depth if you want to really be honest with yourself about what it can do, and I've seen some very, very bad secant pile walls in my time where people have gone too deep and unlocked. It's a very, very efficient system, but it's an expensive system generally because of the equipment input, and generally those types of equipment also, they're not multifunctional. You can, with the rig that does a secant pile, you can do a ball pile, you can do a CFA, you get multifunctional use. If you're gearing yourself up for diaphragm wall, then it's pretty much specialised just in diaphragm wall. That's just
diaphragm wall, yeah.
So you've got to be fairly heavy committed and fairly sure about your market if you're going to go forward there. And as we've mentioned before, our industry is peaks and troughs. Dubai was a good example in the boom in 2005. There were a lot of high-rise towers. If you've ever spent any time in Dubai, you'll know the Marina area and Jumeirah Lake Towers, that area. It's pretty much cut and paste engineering where you have a shoring wall and then you've got foundation elements that hold up these high-rise towers, anything from 40 to 80 stories. But when we first started those shoring walls, they were done, apart from away from the marina, with contiguous piles because you didn't have a water issue. You just wanted an earth retention system in order that you could open excavate a basement and drop your rig in there by ramp or crane, do your piles, and then everybody would come out.
What were generally the depths that you're going to at that time? Let's say, for example, for the foundation piles and also for the excavation for the walls.
Okay, so at that time in Dubai, for example, that time, when you're talking about fairly close to the sea, it does vary as you go further inland. But if you're talking about fairly close to the water, the marina area, the downtown, those kind of areas, then, we were only doing three-level basements, because as the towers came up, the developers would say, okay, it's too technically difficult and expensive to go beyond 3, because then we start dealing with groundwater. So we'll do three levels of car park basement, and then we'll do 3 levels above ground, and then you'll have the rest of your apartments. As the land got further occupied, particularly in the premium areas like the marina, the developers started to realise that they were losing a lot of money by building car parks above ground, So they started pushing the envelope of wanting to go deeper with their basements, and you get to a point where you go from a contiguous system to a secant system, and then you also, by the time you get to, probably 4, maximum 5, when you're starting to approach 30 meters, then the secant system also is very risky to be trying to do secant piles at that depth if you're talking about being close to the sea. And everybody almost realized
seal it, right?
That's right.
The biggest risk is the sealment, right? You can't seal it.
It is, because you can't control the verticality but this was before case secant really started to come into its own, which is a much better system. This was open drilling, and in fact the way they did secant pile walls in Dubai in that time was to actually vibrate the secondary casings through the wet primary concrete of the primary piles. You've never seen anything like it. It scared me to death the first time I saw it. It works. The problem with it is once you start, you can't stop. You cannot stop until you've put the last secondary pile in. It's just... But anyway, so, people start to realise that we'd reached pretty much the limit. You're talking about now maybe 30 metres of excavation. Reached the limit of secant piles, and they started with the first diaphragm walls in the marina, and you're talking about 5 or 6, and we eventually got down to 7 levels of basement right next to the sea in the marina, all done by diaphragm walls. And all the companies there, pretty much all the players, bar a couple,
switched over to this method.
Switched over, switched over. So even at that time, again, trying to get equipment was absolutely horrendous. I bought our first cutter second hand in cash out of Seoul, Korea, because we couldn't get anything out of Europe. I didn't like the Casa Grande system. I didn't like the chain drive on the cutter. I wanted to go with the Bauer system, and you couldn't get one for love nor money. So I had guys scouting the planet looking for old equipment that we could buy second-hand for cash.
That's something so hard to imagine, to pay cash for such an equipment.
Honestly, yeah. And wow. I kid you not, Mike, this was a flight to Seoul from Dubai with 2 carry-on suitcases of cash to go and buy... Really, a Senibogen 6100 and an old Bauer BC30 cutter with desanding set. Yeah.
In the last 15 years of selling equipment, there's only 2 times I've seen cash, but very small amounts. I'm talking, I think one time was like $25,000 they were received in cash for a deposit. And another time, I think it was something like $7,000.
Okay.
A client was like, I've got the money in the car. Can I give you now for a deposit? I was like, yeah, sure. That works. And I was like, Jesus, I've never counted this much money.
Well, this was 1.6 million in 2 carry-on suitcases. Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, that was the nature of the game there.
So comparing, you've mentioned CSP, comparing Secant Pile, because I don't, my previous experience before TerraQuip, I was working for a company that was pushing a lot this sort of method, the Secant Pile, double rotary.
Yeah.
And then you had companies like Avo Piling, and they're like, no, it's not going to work. Diaphragm wall, and that's it. And of course, you as well, you're also a very big fan of diaphragm wall.
Look, it's horses for courses, Mike. It's horses for courses. If you're looking, I mean, if you look at some of the depths that have been gone to now with Secant Pile walls, I think particularly in North America, you're talking about 40 plus meters of Secant Pile. I mean, that just scares the living daylights out of me if you're looking for a watertight system. But technology in terms of, keeping verticality of the drill rigs. When you're doing this by free, massively, and you've always had the Bauer double wall case system has always been the best way to do a Secant Pile wall. But again, you get to the limits where the rig itself cannot handle. Then you're talking about bringing in oscillators, and the whole thing starts to get to a point where it balances with the amount of money you would need to invest or spend or be able to build into a competitive tender to switch that to diaphragm walls. It scares a lot of people, and I know, and I've had this, and I've written a couple of papers about it a few years ago about looking at the comparisons, and I know if you have a bad experience with a diaphragm wall, and I have at least one under my belt, I'm talking about commercial experience, then it's enough for you to say, I'm never ever going to touch that again, because when it goes wrong, it goes wrong big time in terms of money, okay? And there aren't massive margins in it either. Again, it's predominantly materials, concrete and steel, whatever you're doing. People are a little bit afraid of it because it is risky, and it doesn't matter what level of technology you've got. Now, I had a good example on the Gold Coast in Australia quite a few years ago in Surface Paradise, where we got the cutter stuck when we were doing a deep diaphragm wall there for a residential tower, actually, and we had all the technology in the world on that machine. It was state of the art at the time, and it took us 5 weeks to get it out of the hole, and the only thing that had held it there was a collapsed drain from the neighbouring plot, and it held it in place for 5 weeks and cost us in the order of $3 million Australian dollars in lost productivity and everything else to get it out, So it does scare people a little bit, because say when it does go wrong, it does go wrong. But when you see it in action, and it's been done by people who know what they are doing, and they've got the feeling for it. I'm sure you've come across this when you're talking about operators of any kind of machine. If you've got somebody who's got the feeling for this, and knows what they're doing, and you've got a good team around them, good slurry guys, good superintendent, good operator, then, for me, in terms of heavy foundation work, whether you're doing walls or barrettes, I think barrettes are foundation elements as load-bearing elements that are massively underutilized, particularly in Australia. Particularly in Australia, the load-bearing capacities and effectiveness of a good barrette far outweigh what you can achieve on a large diameter ball pile. And if you're talking about going very deep and it's cutter soil, then the productivity is massive. The Americans have got it right. The Americans love what they call LBEs, which are basically barrettes. They do them constantly. Now, I know from Melbourne Metro time, which was really, as far as I'm aware, the first kind of major infrastructure job where barrettes were used as kind of the central column supports for double-barreled tunnels. I know it's certainly more common now, and Sydney Metro and Suburban Rail Loop, it's very common now to use barrettes in the middle, but it wasn't, and I think it's a great alternative, and we use then you get better utilization out of your machines as well. That job we did on the Gold Coast there, we replaced some of the large diameter ball piles, which would really, in the single column scenario that we were looking at, would have been 2.8 or 3 meter diameter ball piles, which is a big hole. Replace that with a 1.5 by 2.8 meter barrette that you can construct in, a third of the time. And it worked very, very well.
Wow. So you mentioned a large diameter pile, and it is something that I've noticed in compared to my limited experience in piling over the last 15 years. The diameters keep increasing. It just seems like the engineers are just trying to cover themselves, because engineering, if you think about it, is about trying to achieve as much as possible or what is necessary with the least amount of material and effort and resources, right? Yeah. But it just seems like lately, and again, I'm not complaining, this is to my benefit because I'm an equipment supplier, right? And I love to sell bigger machines. The bigger machine, the better, right? But I'm just talking from economy point of view. Do you feel like the diameters have increased so much over the last 15, 20 years compared to what it was before?
Generally, yes, generally. The basic premise is that if you can replace 10 small piles with one big one, then, in terms of the efficiency of that construction, the material cost may be not that dissimilar. But, the efficiency and the time, at the end of the day, the piling industry, it's money is time. Okay, it's your tender margins generally are so tight that the only way that you're ever going to make any money is to do the job quicker. So
quicker, yeah.
This is really the way to go. So I've been a part of that evolution of large diameter board piles from, if you go back to even the late 80s, a 1 meter or a 1.2 meter board pile to 30 meters was a big pile, And then in 1999, I was drilling 3 meter diameter piles to 72 meters in the center of Kuala Lumpur. In Hong Kong, we were doing 2.6 meters down to 105 meters, So it's been an evolution that has been facilitated by the two things really. One is the equipment development. If you look back at, if you use the Bauer fleet as kind of the benchmark, and you look back into the 80s, and the biggest thing you could get was in a BG11 or a BG14. And you look now at what's produced, and of course all the competitors to Bauer also producing. If you see some of these behemoth things that the Chinese are playing with at the moment, drilling 6 and 7 meter diameter holes, it's like
just looking in Australia, the amount of BG45s and LB45s, I'm like, where are all these rigs going? Like before, it used to be just one. Just a few years ago, it was like just one BG45 available. That's it. And now it's like even the mid-tier companies, they have one or two coming or already using. And you're like, the progression is just fantastic. Is this because we're building bigger? Is that what it is?
No, not really. I think there are definitely efficiencies in upping the scale, and single pier, single column for things like metros, elevated roadways, elevated metros makes a lot of sense. Okay, I was heavily involved with the piling on Dubai Metro at that time, in the boom time as well, which also brought about the real advent of using polymer with large diameter rather than bentonite. One of the big drivers there in the Middle East was what happened on Dubai Metro, and that was basically the authorities prohibited the use of bentonite purely because they were losing 35 to 40% of the skin friction, and therefore making the piles 30% longer and spending a huge amount of money. But aside from the kind of advent and really the start of using polymer properly, particularly the later additions of vinyl polymers, was the fact that using single column, single pier, single pile, single pier was doing away completely with the pile caps. So the speed with which they could erect the columns on the completed pile and then get the crossheads and the decks up was massively increased, because you're completely deleting one part of the standard process with which you would build a pile or a group of piles with a pile cap, and then you would put your column and your pier and your crosshead. So you totally deleted it, and it worked very, very well there. And I've seen it now time and time again where single pile, single column is very, very common.
Way to go.
That's right. But of course, you need a big diameter pile to be able to make that work.
A big rig, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, Mark, unfortunately, we are running out of time. One last question that I wanted to ask you is, because of course, I've been working, as an equipment supplier for the last 15 years. So one big question is, how does a piling rig supplier, how can it be able to work with a company that works at an international level, where there's always a conception that the cars are already made overseas at the headquarters? Do you think that's true, or do you think that the local people have a huge influence in what equipment is chosen based on what's working and what's available?
Yeah, that's quite a big question, Mike. It varies. It varies.
We gotta finish strong.
Yeah, no. It varies so much across companies and the policies that exist in those companies and who is determining those policies. Is that someone perhaps like me who's come up through the ranks from the ground and has been around the equipment his whole life, or is he a guy that's just come in from ANZ Bank as a bean counter and he's taken over? Very different kind of approaches as to what you would buy.
Yeah.
I'll give you a scenario from my point of view, okay? When it comes to looking at investing in new equipment, it's always been my opinion that if you've got something of similar capacities, so I'm not comparing here a Bauer Liebherr against a Sani or something. That's not an equal, not
comparison,
yet.
Yeah.
And it's not an equal comparison. The after sales service is absolutely crucial. Absolutely crucial. And the better that service is, then the more the client is going to feel confident and will want to. And there are so many stories out there, Mike, of this exact thing, where you've got somebody who's been very loyal to one brand, and then that particular brand maybe has had a change of management in Germany, Austria, or wherever they are, and the focus has shifted. Okay, and without calling names, one very, very famous German manufacturer went through this and has, spoiled their reputation, shall we say, purely because of this, because of the after-sales service, And we made just to give you a quick example of this, when we did the NEOM, the line, okay, in Saudi Arabia a couple of years ago. We had made the decision to invest in brand new rigs specifically for that job. Okay, so I spent many months designing the drill tools, designing and the specs for the machines. So I had something that was specifically, because that job was going to be so big, the machines will be scrapped by the time we finished. I'm not looking at versatility after the job. I'm looking at what I can get the most optimum production and reliability out of that
for
rig.
that particular project. Yeah,
only for that position, because I'm drilling in the same soils, the same diameters, but I'm going to be drilling tens and tens and tens of thousands of piles. Okay, so it's a production line. It's not technically difficult, but I need production. Okay. Now, bearing in mind that I'm in the western Saudi desert and I'm completely, I'm 3.5 hours to the nearest village, let alone main city. So I need...
Very remote location.
Correct. I need the service, I need the backup, I need the spare parts. I need all of that put in place regardless of which machine I buy. And the decision on the machine that we bought, when we compared the two, prices plus or minus were the same, specs plus or minus were the same. But one of those two companies, and the one we ended up buying the rigs from, they put out their specific workshops, spare parts, everything that we had there that we would need if something went wrong, that it could be replaced immediately. And that was the key to us making a decision, even though we had not used that manufacturer before for those type of heavy drill rigs. And I would say any sensible equipment-based company, and particularly if they've got a guy in charge who has experience of this, it's absolutely key, Mike. Absolutely key that that customer service, that backup, the availability of spare parts. Nobody wants to be told that a motor's gone down and you call Germany and they say, oh, we've got nothing in stock, you have to wait for 8 weeks. Okay? It's like, what
Absolutely.
are you talking? No, it cannot be like this. I appreciate this day and age it's very expensive to hold large stock of items, and I know these manufacturers, a lot of them, they don't make these parts themselves, they're relying on other suppliers. But
90% of the time.
In the majority of cases, everybody knows what are the items usually that will go down first. Okay,
Absolutely.
It's very rare that something breaks that you didn't expect. So you need to provide a service to the customer that you've got those parts. You either give them to him on consignment or you keep them somewhere, and you have the technicians to be able to assist him in doing that. Absolutely crucial, Mike, I think, moving forward, especially with new technology and electronics taking over, because we all know from driving our own cars that electronic stuff these days, the mechanics don't come with spanners anymore, they come with laptops.
Yep, 100%. Hey, Mark, thank you so much. It's been a very interesting discussion. We haven't even covered not even 20% of what I had in mind to ask you, but you know what? Who knows? Maybe we're gonna do this again in the next in the next few months or years. Again, thank you so much for taking the time, especially late at night there in Spain. Thank you for your time.
No, my pleasure, Mike. I hope I haven't procrastinated too much. As you say, we could go on like this for hours and hours.
Yeah, and you did promise this in our first response for the invitation. All right. Well, enjoy your time there in Spain, Mark.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you.
For our listeners, thank you so much, guys, for tuning in. I think it was a very interesting discussion with such a pioneer in our industry. Mark from Keller, the last 15 years he spent at Keller. We've had other episodes. We have other significant key players in our industry coming in the next few months. Obviously, it's really hard to organize them, not because they don't want to talk, just because they're so busy with what they're doing. As you heard earlier from Mark, some of them are doing, 12, 14, 16-hour days. And of course, it's also hard for me because I am the managing director of TerraQuip Drilling Equipment. This is just a side thing that I'm doing, that I'm trying to find the time and the energy for. But hey, if you like this episode, please hit that like, subscribe button. If you have any suggestions for me to talk about, or any suggestion of people that you want me to bring here on the show, please let me know. This is the only podcast that we're doing where it's about our industry. It's about the drilling and piling industry in particular. So thank you very much for watching. Please remember, if it's not turning, you're not earning. See you later.
Thanks for tuning in to TerraQuip Talk. If you enjoyed this episode, the best way to support us is by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And don't forget to subscribe on YouTube so you never miss an episode. You can also find out more from me on all social media platforms. The links are below. Until then, remember, if it's not turning, you're not earning.